Hello everyone, it's Jon Cheek here. I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris and Sophie, and I'll introduce them both in just one second. But this is a Uni Taster Tuesday event. It's great to see so many people watching live, or if you're watching back on the recording, I hope you find this session really, really useful. As far as our Uni Taster Tuesday events, just to give a brief introduction before we start this event. Basically at UniTasterDays.com, we run Uni Taster Tuesday events every single Tuesday at 9:30 AM, 12 PM, and also 3 PM, where we look at one particular aspect of university guidance in each event. So the 9:30 AM events and the 3 PM events are subject specials, of which this is obviously a subject special. And then we also run every weekly university guidance on general university topics, such as student finance, how to apply to university, and those events are at 12 o'clock. And we are running those every single week until the end of the year, and also recording them as well. And you can browse all recordings from the events that we've hosted over the last 8 weeks over at UniTasterDays.com/Tuesdays. As far as this event, just to give you an introduction in terms of the format, we'll probably be running this event, I'd say today, for about 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, potentially up to an hour. It's going to feature an introductory presentation, which Chris is going to lead on, and I'll introduce Chris in a second. And then we're also going to open up a Q&A as well. So in terms of this presentation, whilst Chris is presenting, or Sophie might be presenting as well, if you've got any questions at all, please do use the Q&A tab, which you'll notice is right at the foot of the screen. So right at the bottom of the screen, you've got a Q&A area. Please do send them. And then what we'll do is answer as many of those questions as we can once Chris has finished his introductory presentation, and hopefully get some answers to some really good questions that you've got. And I have to say, already I've had a few emails from people in advance of the event sending a few questions as well, which is absolutely wonderful to see. Obviously very proactive and efficient as a group today. Right, as far as this event, it's an introduction to studying veterinary medicine, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Chris Hobson, who's the Head of Student Recruitment at the Royal Veterinary College, and also Sophie MacIntosh, who is a current third-year student as well, to offer a student perspective. The questions I've been having in advance actually have been along the student lines, so it's great to see Sophie here as a real student as well. So a big welcome to Sophie. What I'll do now, and without further ado, because you've not tuned in to hear from me, you tuned in to hear from Chris and Sophie. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Jon, and thank you to UniTasterDays as well for inviting Sophie and I to give you about a 30-minute presentation, which we'll use hopefully to give you an introduction to veterinary medicine. And Sophie will be here to prove that no doubt you can all achieve it and be in her shoes in a few years or so. I just want to reiterate what Jon mentioned with regards to using that Q&A function as well. I know it can be daunting when you're on a platform such as this and you think, oh, I don't want to ask a particular question because I might embarrass myself. Then rest assured you won't embarrass yourself. I can assure you, if you are thinking of it, someone else is thinking of it too. So any questions you have, please use that Q&A function. Hopefully we'll answer a lot of those questions as we go through the next 30 minutes. But obviously, as Jon said, if we don't, we'll come back around and cover them in the final sort of 30 minutes or so. My name is Chris Hobson and I work in the Rbc Access team. So our responsibility as a department is to provide advice, support and process applications, whether it be from an interested student right the way through to an applicant and subsequently an offer holder. So Sophie and I will share our experience with regards to the process of going through applications, and also Sophie's experience of being a student. We are obviously going to use the RVC as sort of the basis for a lot of our anecdotes, and within this presentation we hope to give you a lot of information which you can subsequently take away and do your own research to make sure that you hopefully select the best veterinary school for yourself. So in terms of our objectives that you can hopefully see on the screen at the moment, we hope that that meets everything that you have tuned in for today. So very briefly, introduction into veterinary medicine, Sophie's perspective, speaking from a student's point of view, what she is currently and has experienced up to this point. Then linking that to the application process, hopefully explaining why there are so many entry requirements, or why it feels like there's so many entry requirements across the various veterinary schools. And as I say, hopefully you'll take away a few questions or homework, if you want to call it that, to make sure that you select first and foremost the best veterinary school for you, and subsequently you stand the best chance of getting in because you've asked a lot of intelligent questions, which I'm sure you'll do through the Q&A function that we've mentioned as well. So to give you a very brief overview of our almost 230-year history at the RVC, we were founded in 1791. This is an image of our cohort from around the early 1930s. You'll be pleased to know that Sophie and her peers no longer need to wear those bowler hats, and you'll also be probably pleased to see that it's changed in terms of student population. So this is an open day from a couple of years ago with our students in the black t-shirt there. So every vet school you'll find is slightly different. We are a specialist veterinary school, so we only focus on programs which aim to improve animal health and welfare. We aim to achieve this through education. That's what we've been for the entirety of our history, but we also are very fortunate to have our own hospitals and clinics where we hope to have a positive impact in animals' lives there. And we also hope to make new discoveries which can be integrated into our education for our students, and also those clinical provisions which I have just mentioned. I'll probably leave it there in terms of us at the RVC, because I'm sure you're more interested in the course itself. So I'll move on to hopefully what is, you feel, a general overview of veterinary medicine within the UK. So we're using the term veterinary medicine today. You might be more familiar with veterinary sciences or words similar to that. So I thought that was probably the best place to start. If you're looking on the ucas.com website, the course code, if it's a D100 prefix, so if it's, for example, D105, then the D100 is a prefix of that. So you are applying to a veterinary course. What you might find with search engines, when you search veterinary, it might bring up, say, 100 odd results. And as you can see from the list of institutions within the UK who offer, as I say, we're going to refer to it as veterinary medicine for the entirety of this presentation. There are not 100 odd providers. So there are 10 providers, as you can see, listed alphabetically on the screen at the moment. You may well have also heard rumours, because Sophie and I do get this relatively frequently in terms of how long does it take to study, because whether that be a great aunt or a friend of a family, so on and so forth, say, I've heard it takes longer to study to become a veterinarian than it does a human doctor, but it is the same duration in the most part. So typically you are looking at a 5-year course. The eagle-eyed amongst you in the audience will probably notice that Cambridge is a 6-year programme, and that's because they have what's called a forced intercalation, which means if you are a high school graduate going into their veterinary school, you will take a pause in your veterinary studies. Typically that's after your 2nd year, and do a science discipline for a year. Then you will resume the final 3 years of your veterinary studies and complete both a veterinary degree and gain a science qualification in 6 years. So obviously things to factor in are whether you want to study for 5 years or 6 years in duration. What I would say as well is that typically most other veterinary schools, so I'm referring to those outside of Cambridge, do offer an intercalation as an option. So typically you can, if you're really interested in the sciences, typically you can up that to a 6-year program with an intercalation. And as I say, that basically means a pause in your studies, focus with the veterinary focus, and you move to a science discipline for a year. Accreditations may well be another factor which sort of start you on your process of progressing to a particular veterinary school or applying to a number of veterinary schools. I just want to highlight both Harper Adams Keele and also Aberystwyth University. The reason that they're currently not accredited is because the RCVS, who is the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, the equivalent in human medicine to, say, the General Medical Council, so they oversee the education of veterinary students within the UK, and also, amongst other things, monitor standards within the veterinary profession. So if you've taken your pet to your local veterinarian, you may well see it's an RCVS accredited practice because it meets certain standards. Basically, they act, the best analogy I can give, which isn't quite exactly the same, but if you've experienced within your school or have heard of Ofsted doing inspections of your school or other schools, basically veterinary schools go through this vigorous audit, but it is run by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, the RCVS. Obviously, they can only fully audit a degree program when there are students in each year of the course. So Harper Adams and Aberystwyth are the newest members of the family in terms of universities providing veterinary education. So they haven't got students in every one of their 5 years. So as such, an audit cannot be completed. Surrey was the newest member of the family and the newest to be accredited because the summer, I say just gone, obviously it's quite a while ago now, they graduated their first cohort. So in October of 2019, approximately, they were able to announce that they had become accredited because they'd gone through that audit. Now, it is best to speak with Aberystwyth, Harper Adams Keele with regards to the correspondence that they are having with the RCVS as they build up to having 5 years of students. But I would suggest it is probably expected that they're doing their respective due diligence in order to ensure that they get that accreditation. With regards to the RCVS, the UK accreditation, typically what that also brings with it is European accreditation, as well as Australasian accreditation, and the ability to work in the Republic of Ireland and South Africa. So veterinary medicine, typically no matter where you're going to study within the UK, does present a lot of opportunities post-graduation, but please do check with each respective school. With regards to travelling perhaps further west, if you're interested in working within North America, then the AVMA or the American Veterinary Medical Association might influence the universities that you choose to apply to, because there are 4 currently who are accredited by the AVMA, that North American governing body. Okay, so what we wanted to do here is to try and summarize the 10 veterinary institutions within the UK of a 5-year course on one slide. So hopefully you can appreciate that this is a very basic overview, and I'm sure you can appreciate, just as your schooling has been perhaps interrupted at this particular time and will probably in future be tweaked and changed slightly, this is a typical example. We're not guaranteeing that this is definitely how every veterinary school will operate. It's just to hopefully give you a bit of insight, which we'll subsequently link to why veterinary schools ask for certain requirements. So typically in a veterinary degree program, you will start with your preclinical couple of years, so focusing on the basic sciences. And after the slide, we'll come to Sophie to sort of, I guess, explain what we're meaning by basic sciences or preclinical. Then typically after those first couple of years, you'll start looking at the paraclinical in more depth, so the unhealthy animal, if you will. And then with that founding of healthy, moving on to unhealthy, you'll then go into the clinical components of the course, so into hospitals, practices, etc., in order to treat patients, albeit under direction, under supervision, so that you can employ the knowledge which you've gained typically over your formative years of that 5-year degree course. Now, it's not to say that it's quite as clear cut as that, because as I'm sure you can appreciate, they all start to link to one another. So if we're telling you or teaching about the basic sciences, we may well be saying, and this is relevant when you get to your clinical components of the course in these particular ways. So it's not to say it's quite that clear cut. And some universities try to introduce more clinical components earlier on in the program. But what I just draw your attention to is clinical can mean anything from being within those practices to in a safe environment like a clinical skills centre, which is an environment to practice the skills that you'll do in a veterinary environment in a safe manner, and typically on things like teddy bears which have been amended with synthetic skin or had things to make them feel like they've got skeletons within them, so that you can practice those skills before having to do it for real on those patients. It is an intense course, as I hope you can appreciate, studying a 5-year program. And now at the minute, and this is under review for obvious reasons, I'm sure you can appreciate, typically there is a requirement whereby students have to undertake in their first 2 years, so relating to those preclinical years that we've just referred to, of essentially animal handling. So typically that's in the production animal side of things, so farms, for example, lambing, dairy placements, and working with large animals like horses as well, amongst others. So that's to hopefully re-emphasize that theory which you're getting within the preclinical aspects of the course, but it's also in situ, so it's in the businesses that you will probably be visiting and working with when you get to the clinical components of the course. So you might want to refer to it with regards to work experience within the course. Similarly, in the latter part of a 5-year degree program, and I'm going to use the term 5 years rather than explaining that 6-year option for Cambridge throughout the presentation. I hope you are okay with that. So then there is typically placements outside of the university, so outside of the hospitals which a university has, as well as placements within a university's hospital, if indeed a university does have a hospital on one or all of their campuses. So hopefully you're aware that it is an intense degree program, 5 years, and those placement weeks that we've sort of alluded to, but as I say, they are under review, does take place in a large proportion during your vacation periods. So it's important to bear in mind that you might not have the long vacations of, say, and this is no disrespect to any courses I mentioned, but maybe a less vocational course like English or maths, for example. Typically you'd find you'd have a more intense degree program than those curriculums in general. With regards to pre-registration differentiation, this is a very long way of saying perhaps a slight bias in your degree program. I'm sure you're all interested in a particular area of veterinary medicine at the moment. That might well be down to pet ownership. You really like cats, for example, or you like horse riding, so you might be thinking at the moment that you're wanting to become an equine veterinarian. What I would say is try and keep an open mind, because in the UK you graduate as a veterinarian who is able to treat any species, so both the small companion animals, the large companion animals like horses, as well as the production animals as well. So you do a bit of everything. However, there is an opportunity to have a little bit more of an area of interest which you have, which is that bias or pre-registration differentiation. Some of you might have heard of being a specialist, and you might be aspiring to be a specialist. That's a protected term. So you can't be a specialist without further training after your 5-year veterinary degree. So that's why we're not using that term here. But again, an opportunity for differentiation between veterinary schools. You know, if you're interested in a certain area, ask those various schools, you know, what are my opportunities to work with horses, or whatever area that might well be. And there is a large requirement, both within the course and within the profession, to do what's called CPD, or continued professional development. So as a veterinarian, currently the requirement is for a registered veterinarian to undertake 35 hours a year of essentially further learning, because, as I'm sure you can appreciate, things are constantly changing, whether it be new viruses, new diseases, new treatment methods. So you need to make sure you're at the cusp of veterinary sciences, so that you are not, I guess, accidentally mistreating an animal by employing knowledge that you learnt 20, 30, however many years since graduation. With regards to the teaching methods, Sophie's sort of going to cover a little bit of that, but I'm sure you have preferences in terms of how you like to learn at the moment. You might like a very didactic or traditional style where you're in lectures a large amount of the time, or you might like more group work activity. It is a continuum, so schools are on that spectrum somewhere. It will vary where on the line they are. By that I mean, not every veterinary school is just going to be lectures, and not every veterinary school is just going to be problem-based learning. It's going to be a mixture, because there are obviously a variety of teaching methods. With such a vocational degree program, you are going to have to do practical elements as an example. Typically, your final year is lecture free. You're doing those either external placements or the internal placements within a hospital, or a mixture of both. So I'm just going to now hand over to Sophie, who's going to give you a little bit of an insight into her curriculum, what she's experienced over the last 3 years or so.
Thank you, Chris. So yeah, as Chris said, our preclinical years are basically when we're learning about the healthy animal. So that's going to be learning about normal physiology and normal anatomy. Obviously, my experience is within the RVC. So the way that we do it is we have a very spiral timetable. And what that means is basically you will never ever learn one topic 1 year and then not go over it again until 2 years later. You learn each topic every year, and every single year you will spiral over it. So you'll go over it and over it again, which I personally believe is like a really good way to do it, because you never don't do something for such a long time that you forget. You're always going over and always getting a refresher on that. Again, as Chris said, every university will differ. However, at RVC, we have a mixture of lectures, which every university will have. It's basically where you're going to get the main bulk of your information. And then that's followed by a certain amount of DLs, which is a directed learning session. And this basically is when you're with a group and you get to work through problems and clinical cases that are presented to you. And then we also have a large range of practicals, so whether that be dissections or work with microscopes and things like that. By far one of my favourite things in the first 2 years, so again your preclinical years learning about the healthy animal, was the dissections. In your first 2 years it's very dissection heavy, and I just thought it was very interesting to go from the lectures and being taught about certain things and then going to the dissections and being able to see them in real life. So for example, if I was studying locomotor, which is about the limbs and how they work, and I was to be studying the forelimb and I wanted to go and see the forelimb muscles, it was really useful to have that as an option and to go and feel them and locate them for myself. On top of that, I think the RVC just has amazing supportive staff. Like Chris said, we are a large vet school, but we're quite a small university, and I can't comment on other universities because I've never been to another university, just RVC, but the supportive staff are incredible. We're a very small knit community, and yeah, we're like a big family there. So you get a lot of one-to-one support, which is great. Again, what Chris has already spoke about, AHEMS, so that is going to be basically when you're going out onto farms and you're learning the husbandry side to your degree. So basically you're going to be learning about, you know, the nutrition, the diet of animals, the housing of animals, and just general like lifestyle that they have, again, with the farmers and working with those and building those relationships up. They are in your holidays, but they are also super fun. So that's not to say you're not going to have a good time in your holidays. You're just going to be doing something that's within your degree. And you can use it as a kind of excuse to travel your own country. I feel like I'm quite guilty of always wanting to get away on holiday to different countries, whereas with my AHEMS, I tried to place them around the UK, so I could see a bit more of the UK myself, so it made it a little bit more enjoyable. And then moving on to exams and how we are assessed. In our first 2 years, the main bulk of our examinations are within the summer, and we assess in essays, multiple choice questions, and problem solving questions. But so make sure they're not a complete shock to you when you first come to university. Obviously, you're really good at basically doing ICAs, which are in-course assessments, and basically that's going to be an exam that's worth a minor percentage towards your end results for that year. But there will be one in Christmas and one at Easter, which is your PSQ and MCQ. So you've had a little bit of a go at those types of exams. You're prepped for the summer. So if we just move on to clinical years. So these are clinical years, so that's where I am now. So again, as Chris said, the clinical years are going to be talking about the disease animal, the poorly animal, and when things start to go wrong. It is really, really good. So again, we continue with that spiral curriculum. So you're always going over and over what you've been taught, always topping up that knowledge. So basically in your third year, same thing's going to apply as the first 2 years, but again, it's going to have a more clinical aspect. And then when you get to your first term of fourth year, we have something called the last day of lectures. And that is when we have a massive celebration, because after 4 years of lectures every single week, we no longer have any more, and we're going to move on to our practical phase of the degree. Not to say we don't have lots of practicals already within, but this is just solely practicals from now on. So basically we all get dressed up as one theme. For example, 1 year it was Lion King. We all came to lectures in fancy dress and we had a big celebration. So that's really fun. And then from then on out, we move to rotations. So that is going to be a mixture of rotating around our hospitals, as we are lucky enough to have hospital up on campus. And we basically go through all the different strands that are there, so we can go through neurology, cardiology, etc., etc. And within those rotation schedules, we also book our own EMS to top that up to. And then finally, we come towards our fifth year, which we do our practical exams, which are called OSCEs, and that is to basically make sure that you are competent in doing all your day one skills that you're going to be going out and doing as a vet. And then hopefully if you pass your OSCEs, you then take your exams and your finals, and hopefully if you pass those, you then graduate. So that is basically your clinical years in a nutshell. Just to mention, your preclinical years are in a campus in Camden, which is central London, and your clinical years are up on the campus in Hawkshead, which is in Hertfordshire.
Thank you, Sophie, and thanks for sharing your experiences of the last 3 years. We'll check. Just going to skip on through this because we're running a little bit late in terms of time. We can maybe come back to it if there are questions. But hopefully, we've highlighted a few points to look at with regards to looking at the school, looking at the course year, looking at, or for yourselves to look at how it's taught, also how it's assessed, whether there's an opportunity to study a particular species or area of veterinary medicine which you're interested in. So you're starting to do that research in terms of which school is best for oneself. As I say, realistically, there's no one school which is the best veterinary school in the world. It's about finding the best veterinary school in the world for yourselves. Prospectuses, you can usually get free of charge mailed to your house. If you wanted a physical document, or you can usually view them on websites as well. And I'm sure you're used to now going to sort of virtual open days or webinars such as that. So what I would encourage you is you do your research and do it across all veterinary schools, because no matter where that veterinary school is based. If you hear a particular name of a city, for example, you might think more of a sports team, or there'll be a preconception which you have in your head when you hear any name of location of any university. So I'd say put that to the side whilst you're doing your research, so that you select the best school for yourself, rather than based on perhaps misconceptions about a particular location. So moving on to sort of our RBC entry requirements. With regards to entry requirements, we completely appreciate that it is a complex field to navigate, by which I mean when you're looking at 10 veterinary schools and they all have slightly different entry requirements. The reason that we are doing that is not because we are trying to confuse you as prospective applicants. The reason that we do it is because we will have slightly different programs. We are wanting to select those students who are most likely to do well on our program. So you might see some universities that prefer all sciences at A level or other level 3 qualifications, such as the IB Hires, and some who don't stipulate 3 sciences. And the reason that we do that is because we all track our students and make sure that we are asking for entry requirements which reliably predicts how a student will fare within our academic program. So hopefully by doing the research of how you like to be taught, how you like to be assessed, so on and so forth, you'll probably find that that shortlist which you get down to from the 10, hopefully the entry requirements you are already fulfilling because you found that best fit for yourself. If there is anything which you are unsure of or have a slightly different education system to the average student, and I'm not meaning any disrespect by that, then speak to a veterinary school, because we are here, people like myself, to ensure that you make the strongest application that you can. We're not going to say, yeah, definitely apply. No, if there is no chance of you being, or limited chance of you being successful, we're going to be honest so that you select 4 veterinary applications, which, well, we can only answer with regards to our school, but so that one of those applications is stands a good chance of being successful based on the advice that we give. So in terms of moving on from the academic requirements, hopefully you've matched your aspiration of wanting to become a veterinary student to your either predicted achievement and or achievements to that point. So again, another way to filter down veterinary schools. I would say, generally speaking, all veterinary schools are looking for you to have an insight and understanding into the profession, so into the veterinary profession. The reason for that is it's an intense course, as we've referred to. We don't want students to come in having misconceptions of the profession. They start on track of a 5-year course and then realise that program is not for them, because we obviously want students to complete our respective courses. So we want you to have as greater insight as possible, whether that be from work experience, whether that be from wider reading, speaking to students like Sophie, speaking to members of academic staff, so on and so forth. Because of that intensity as well, the 5-year duration, vacation times typically taken up by placements, but as I said, that is under review in terms of the volume at the moment. We need to have the most dedicated and motivated students possible to ensure that they see through those 5 years of the program. Obviously, very related to that is the passion, the interest and the commitment to joining the profession. And we also want to see that you have the skills and characteristics that you would probably see in your local veterinary practice. So if you are fortunate to have a pet, I'm sure you go into a veterinary practice and think, oh, this vet did this really well, and oh, I really like the professionalism which she or he demonstrated, so on and so forth. So we would always suggest writing a list of all of those skills that you would want to see in a veterinarian, and then when it comes to making an application, trying to demonstrate to veterinary schools that you have a large proportion of those skills and or characteristics there. Work experience, and this is the work experience with regards to the RBC. Work experiences do vary on veterinary schools, so please do check with each veterinary school. Again, we have different requirements due to the fact we have different predictors of success on our respective veterinary programs. Also be aware of either work experience questionnaires or supplementary application forms. Ours must be submitted through our website by October the 15th. Typically, we would ask that all students have completed work experience, which equates to 70 hours of clinical experience. So that means within a veterinary setting. So, you're observing a veterinarian doing clinical tasks, and plus 70 hours of non-clinical experience. So outside of the home, so you're in a business and you are looking after and handling animals. With regards to the approach, we would always recommend with regards to work experience, as well as generally within the veterinary program, and I guess in life, is not just doing the bare minimum. The reason that academic requirements are high and that there are work experience requirements is because veterinary schools get a lot of applicants. So if you consider everyone does the curriculum, what you do outside of the curriculum is going to differentiate you from applicant A, applicant B, and applicant C. So similarly, hopefully after this presentation, of which the average person will retain about 5% of what Sophie and I say, you might do some further reading based on the questions that we've submitted. You might go on YouTube and try and find some videos about it. You might speak to friends and or other colleagues at school. And subsequently, the further you go down that learning period, the more you are likely to retain that information. So going back to work experience, if you just watch in work experience, don't ask any questions, don't read around the subject, then you're not going to retain much of that experience which you undertake. So we would always encourage being proactive and writing notes at the very least. Now the situation is currently evolving with regards to COVID-19 and the impact that is having with regards to applicants currently. We're at the moment, we will consider each applicant on a case-by-case basis with regards to evidence of previously booked placements, but it's a constantly evolving situation. So I would say with regards to work experience, check all of the veterinary schools' websites just shortly before applications open through the UCAS portal to get the most up-to-date information. With regards to personal statements, some veterinary schools look at this more than others. General tips for personal statements are 80% focused on the course which you're applying to. So in this instance, veterinary medicine. This is your opportunity to share that passion and also to demonstrate that passion, which we mentioned veterinary schools are wanting in an application. So we want to find out what's driving you to follow this career path, any experience which really reinvigorated or further invigorated your passion with regards to studying veterinary medicine. And I would typically say veterinary schools are looking for you to obviously tell us a little bit about what you have seen, but that reflection is probably more important. So yes, you might have seen something, but upon reflection, this has given you an insight into a skill perhaps that is required within the veterinary practice, or enabled you to develop the aforementioned skill which you identify as a key part of being a veterinary professional, so that you link everything together. I've seen this, I've gained a greater insight into the veterinary profession, and through this I've developed this skill, which is very key when speaking with clients in a veterinary setting, as a very brash example there. I'd say the minority, I'd say typically up to 20%, focusing on your other positions of responsibility, like volunteering in a charity shop or part-time employment. And with regards to that, always make sure there's a point to including it. So again, linking to that list of skills which you've hopefully identified as you believing a veterinarian, being a good trait of a veterinarian. If you worked at Sainsbury's, you're not, or any other supermarket for that matter, that's not going to be the reason that you get an offer or invited to interview. Instead, if you do say about your commitment, for example, which I would envisage as a trait that you would want in a veterinarian, then that might be something you can portray through working for the last 5 years at a supermarket. And or if you're on the customer service desk, you can talk about your professional communication skills. So always make sure there's a point to something which you're including, that it's telling the university or showing the university that you have a requisite skill. we're running a little bit over, but we'll quickly go through this. So we've got two personal statements. We have personal statement A, which is a short section of a personal statement, which you can hopefully read through whilst I'm talking. We'll give a couple of seconds for you guys to read that. And it will obviously be on the recording that John mentioned at the top of the webinar if you don't get the time to go through it. And then we're going to move over to applicant B. So these are two clips of example personal statements. It's probably an important time to say here that there is technology to identify students who copy other people's personal statements. So make sure your personal statement is your own. Hopefully between applicant A and applicant B, you can see a slight difference, whereas applicant A is to a little bit more stating what they've seen rather than what they've learned. You'll see that applicant B goes a little bit further with regards to linking things together, with regards to what they've seen, what they've learned, and then skills which they've developed as a result of seeing something, which was hopefully to reinforce the point we made a second ago. With regards to getting through to interviews, each university interviews in a different way. So again, speak to each veterinary school. And the reason we do that is again, because different universities have different courses. So different assessment methods are better at predicting success on University X's program as opposed to University Y program. With regards to the Royal Veterinary College, we do multi-mini station interviews, which are science speed dating is probably the quickest way to explain them, as well as a group or team task as well. Typical scenarios are finding your motivation for wanting to become a vet, pushing you in some detail about the work experience, not to just see what you've observed, but to see how you can reflect upon those observations and what you've learned and how you can apply that experience. Typically, there's a lot of scenarios. So we have an example scenario here, and Sophie, very briefly, because we have gone over time by about 10 minutes now, and we want to allow time to answer questions, is going to answer the question that I'm going to pose now, which is, of these 4 images, which you can hopefully see on the screen at the minute, could you rank these 4 photos, 1 being the most acceptable treatment of animals in society, to 4 being the least acceptable treatment of animals in society? And after Sophie answers, we'll give a few tips with regards to some of the approach with which she has taken. So Sophie, do you want to, as quickly as you can, run through these for us?
Yeah, sure. So at first I'd be like, okay, Chris, so I see these images in front of me, so I recognise that they're a snapshot of time and that these are only going to reflect a couple of seconds in the animal's life. And also I know that there's 2 sides to everything. So in my personal opinion, I think the number 1, so the most acceptable, would be the kitten in the top left-hand corner. I understand that a lot of people would first look at this and think that it's unnatural because an animal is wearing an item of clothing. But from my own personal experience, whilst I was working in a vet clinic, I know that this is actually an alternate protection mechanism to something that's called a buster collar, which animals normally wear as protection when they've had wounds and the vet doesn't want them to lick them or damage them. If an animal can't have this, for example, this kitten, sometimes they put these on in terms of a protective mechanism so they don't get to their wounds. My second would probably be, again, the animal to the right, the 2 dogs in the fashion accessories. I see the negative side to it. I see how people would say this is using your what should be your pet as a fashion accessory. And I would then link that probably into my experience of social media and how I've seen on the news and research that this can lead to negative effects, i.e. in brachycephalic dogs. But then I would also, on the flip side, say if I was to compare this to a dog that was potentially being abused, these dogs are clearly loved and are living a good life, and we don't necessarily know that they're uncomfortable in what they're wearing. The next one, I would probably go for the greyhound. Again, similar reasons. A lot of people have ethical issues in terms of how these animals are being used for betting and gambling, and they're being raced. Some people would say it's unfair on them and they're being pushed. Potential issues with kind of drugs that may be used to make them better. However, again, you could see the other side to it. These dogs are athletic, they love to run, do they enjoy it, and that kind of side of it. Again, my fourth one would be the remaining picture, so it would be the tiger, which is chained up. I instantly see the negative sides to this. So this is supposed to be a wild animal, it is changed. I know from my own research, again, that a lot of these animals are drugged in terms of sedation so that people can get this close to them for pictures, and it's very unnatural. But personally, I was lucky enough to go on an exchange to South Africa, in where I actually learned all about ecotourism, and I can see the flip side to this in terms of this animal is probably used in terms of maybe a charity or a breeding program, in which this is purely to make money in terms to benefit other animals. So even though this animal potentially may be suffering, there may be another side to it.
Thank you for that, Sophie. Hopefully, as you can see, she demonstrated what she was seeing, because if we don't say what we're seeing, then the other person doesn't know what viewpoint we are taking. Two sides to the particular situation, so giving a balanced response, whilst also integrating and applying her experience and or research to that answer, which is showing the application of knowledge and evidence basing the answers which she was giving. And I think it was quite clear overriding was Sophie's aspiration to for improving animal health and welfare being at the heart of all of her answers. So in summary, hopefully we've given you a very brief overview of veterinary medicine, things to ask about with regards to the sort of entry requirements. I would also encourage you to ask every veterinary school where typically applicants underperform, so that you don't make the same mistake that perhaps former peers might well have done with regards to the RVC. It's not completing that supplementary questionnaire. If you are fortunate enough to get work experience, be proactive and passionate. Do everything with a smile, and after each day or each hour, be reflective. So what have I learned from this, either about the veterinary profession or a skill required within the veterinary profession? And then how can I learn more about it? So can I develop my communication skills, or can I look online about neutering or spaying, whatever it might well be. With regards to the interviews you've just seen, you could almost pick a number of photos from the internet with regards to animals in society, and practice with peers with regards to tell me your opinion on this particular treatment of animals in society, and hopefully you'll bring in your experience, because that's typically an area at interview students, other than the work experience questions, don't bring in their work experience or further reading, so they're not evidence basing what they are saying. So if you want to learn more about the RVC, our website /RVC for me will keep you abreast of all of the upcoming events and any changes, if there are any to be made with regards to entry requirements and or work experience information. And our contact details there. And I think I'll stop sharing my screen now so that we can go sort of to the Q&As, and hopefully if there are any questions which we didn't answer as a result of the presentation, we can cover within the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was Excellent. If you are interested in this subject area, I couldn't think of a better way to spend an hour. So thank you, Chris. Thank you also to Sophie for the student perspective, which is often lacking in events like this, but it's so useful. So a big thank you to you both. If you're happy now, we'll now take some Q&A questions. There's a lot of questions, Chris, have come in related to work experience, and you did touch on that in your presentation. But what I don't want to do is kind of move on quickly from that, because it's obviously on a lot of students' minds. So if you don't mind, I'll go through just 3 very linked questions that I've had, all kind of around the same subject. And if I could have your thoughts, that'd be really useful. So first one, I've lost 2 placements due to COVID-19. Will the universities take that into account when I apply? And if I just move on to some linked questions to that, Chris, before you answer it, that's okay. And actually looking at the, sorry, Chris, I'm reading as I'm talking. Yeah, so, okay, so is work experience needed, and what to do if our work experience is cancelled due to COVID-19? And yeah, the other question is very similar to that. So maybe if you deal with those 2 together, please, Chris.
No worries. So as we briefly touched on, I would strongly encourage documenting any placements which have been curtailed due to COVID-19 or any other reasons, although I guess it would be the former, so that you have proof that you had that week, those 2 weeks, whatever your personal situation was, and you can say, you know, I had it organised, but it wasn't able due to obviously circumstances beyond my control. What I would say is hopefully you have some form of experience. So whilst you might have had 2 weeks or however long it was, unfortunately cancelled, hopefully you have done some work previous to that. So if COVID didn't affect you before, say, the lambing season, you might have been able to get some lambing experience, or from a former year of your experience. I can completely understand that it's a very nerve-wracking time, because this is obviously not just with regards to your education, but also with regards to gaining experience. It's unprecedented times. So we are in the same boat as you with regards to wanting to be as fair as possible. What I would say is work experience is a very good predictor for us of whether a student will do well on our program, and also enabling a student to gain an insight into the veterinary profession. So hopefully you've got some. If you haven't, and or if you've had things cancelled, there are a lot of podcasts, like the Veterinary Times do a podcast, the RBC do a clinical podcast. So I think trying to do things in that realm or that sphere would be a beneficial use of your time, both now but also over those 2 weeks where you perhaps had plans already in place which have now been curtailed, so that you're furthering your knowledge, furthering that insight and awareness that you have. Because the more things you do in that nature, the more you're going to start differentiating yourself from other applicants. And rest assured, all applicants are in a very similar boat at the moment. I haven't spoken to any potential future applicant who hasn't been impacted by COVID-19 with regards to work experiences. So it is something that we are reviewing, and as I say, I think it will become a little bit more clear before UCAS goes live, which is typically the start of September, because by that point we know whether we have been eased furthermore in terms of lockdown, and or we know whether the whole summer was basically curtailed for everyone and can make appropriate steps to tweak or change entry requirements if we feel that is fair, both on the applicant and also the application process as well.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent. I'll ask now again 2 linked questions. The Q&A has been remarkably popular, which is fantastic. Obviously a very engaged group of students, potential students watching this. So we'll go through a few together. So this one is about fifth options, Chris, which obviously doesn't relate directly to the RVC. But in terms of the fifth choice, have you got any tips about how students could approach it? And then a linked question to that. is, as obviously you can only apply for 4 courses. If you go for obviously a 5th choice, have you got any tips relating to personal statements of what you can do, given it's one personal statement for all of those?
Yeah, so with regards to 5th choice, I would say typically what we tend to find is that students will use it because they're applying to 4 other institutions, as you alluded to there, John, with regards to a veterinary focus. So that 5th choice is almost well, I might as well, in the sense of it's not going to cost anymore. And also it can be quite a nice what's the word, security blanket, or for want of a better word. So definitely consider using it. You don't have to accept an offer if you are given an offer to a program which is your 5th choice. So yeah, if you can find a course which you think seriously you would consider studying, then definitely put it down. What we tend to find with regards to personal statements is that if you're interested in veterinary medicine, the 5th choice is going to be an allied science. So that might be, and I'll make some random names out at the moment, it might be animal sciences, zoology, biological sciences, so on and so forth. So it's probably going to be quite akin to your personal statement, which is primarily focused on the other 4 courses, if that makes sense. But hopefully you'll have the insight with regards to veterinary medicine that it's not about just stroking cats and dogs all day. It's a science. It's a medical profession underpinned by the sciences. And if you're interested in any of those other 5th choice programs, they will be some of the science which underpins veterinary medicine, perhaps without the physical application of that. So personal statements, make sure you focus on the sciences, I would say, and generally animal sciences, and then the same personal statement, I'm sure, can be attributed to both without the reader necessarily being aware of that.
Thank you, Chris. In terms of this event, I should add that I mentioned right at the start that we were going to finish at 4 o'clock. But I'm conscious that we've got a lot of questions here that are brilliant questions, and it's a great opportunity for you to have answers to them. So
yeah, I can stay.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. So what basically how we'll move from now is if you need to leave it at 4 o'clock, that's obviously absolutely fine. We're recording this session. The recording will be available hopefully as early as tomorrow. I'll do my best to get it out. So if you need to leave us, please do so. But given that Chris is still available, and fingers crossed Sophie is available too, what I don't want to do is end the session then not cover the questions. So I'll keep on going with the questions if that's okay. So, but I will try and group them as much as I can, given that we have so many. Another one, Chris, if I can, about work experience.
Yep.
Grouping 2 questions again. First part of the question, is paid work experience okay? And maybe a linked question to that, but certainly related. Is work experience accepted if you grew up on a working livestock farm, so you've perhaps completed many lambing sessions, etc., within the family environment?
Thanks, John. So with regards to the answers, I'll answer sort of on behalf of the RVC, and then suggest please do contact the respective school or schools that you are also considering. With regards to ourselves, we don't mind whether any work experience accrued is either you being paid, you having paid to carry out, and or whether it is voluntary. The important thing for us is that you have gained some work experience. So that is the RVC's perspective on work experience. With regards to the question, is it okay within the home, whether that be a farm, or I'll take it a little bit further as well. We might have some students on the call whose parents are veterinarians or something of that nature as well. We would suggest trying to get outside of what we would call the home environment. That's not to say you wouldn't have learnt and benefited from the expertise that you've perhaps grown up within, but we want you to be in a professional setting. And I'm not suggesting anyone's home business isn't professional, but it will be slightly different to, say, if you have grown up on a farm, seeing whether traditionally being in a rural location, whether farms in that similar vicinity could take you, so that they could give you a reference. And it's always good to get references, which is sort of a side point as well. So I would say try and get experience outside of your home environment, whether that be a farm, whether that be a veterinary practice, so that that reference is coming from, I would guess the best way to put it would be an impartial source. If you are having a reference from a parent or guardian, again, not to say that you wouldn't have done as well as they've said, but obviously in terms of impartiality, it's perhaps slightly more challenging to verify that. So I would say the benefit of growing up on a farm, to move forward that example, is you've probably absorbed quite a lot of information throughout your life up until that point, assuming that you've got involved. So when it comes to especially interview, that's where that benefit will probably be stronger, because as Sophie demonstrated, bringing in that experience, if you've been up at 4 a.m. or whatever the time is, milking the cows, then if a question comes up about cows, then you're going to be, one would hope, be able to answer more questions and in a more informed manner on that particular topic. And as well, with regards to personal statements, one would suspect that you can demonstrate that greater wealth of knowledge and probably enthusiasm, one would hope, as well. So yeah, we would ask for it outside of a homestead, but that's not to say it wouldn't be beneficial in that environment.
Thank you, Chris. Excellent. If I can now ask a question related to the student experience of Sophie, if that's okay, Chris, which will also give you a little rest. I'm conscious that you have been working really hard over the last hour or so. So, Sophie, a question that's coming from Emma, who also asked a previous question that you answered during the session, which worked out really well, is related to kind of your schedule. And in terms of study breaks, do you get them, or are lectures more back to back?
So it is an intense course, but we do get breaks. In regards to our schedule, our timetable is live, so it is not. So if I use my own experience as a comparison, when I was in college, for example, I had the exact same lessons every single day at the same time every single week. So for example, every Monday I would have biology for 2 hours at 9 o'clock, and that would happen every single Monday for that year. It does vary a lot at RVC. So basically one Monday you could be in for 2 hours, the next Monday you could be in 9 till 5 with breaks in between. So the longest you're going to be in university is from 9 till 5, but that is not back to back. So you are going to have breaks in between that. So for example, you could have lectures 9 till 11, and then you could have 2 hours off and a practical. So it's very difficult to answer because there's nothing set, but you definitely have time break within the day to do studying or just have a nap or go for some food or whatever that may be, and you definitely are not in constantly every single day. As a rule, Wednesday afternoons are always off, so it's only a half day on a Wednesday, so that leaves you time and opportunity to do sports and societies, and most of our sports and societies do actually have their games or their training or whatever that may be on a Wednesday afternoon, and then they normally follow by a social where everybody goes out together and has a good time. So again, it is an intense course, but as long as you manage your time well, you won't struggle to find time as downtime or to do whatever you want to do. So I hope that answers the question. If not, just put in again.
Can I come in there, Sophie? Sorry, John.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, over to you, Chris.
I was just wondering, was there a particular difference that you particularly noticed going from high school onto university? I know it's not really the same question, but I think there's probably parallels. I imagine a lot of students are concerned in that step up between further education to higher education.
I guess again it is intense and it is a step up. However, the way I always view it is in terms of high school. I was always study to try and get to the next level, which for me was college and A-levels, to get that biology, chemistry and a third subject. And then when I was doing that, I felt like I was almost there, but then when I finally got to vet school, I was finally studying what I wanted to study since I was this big, as a lot of people are. And it is intense, but you kind of, it's a sigh of relief that you're studying what you finally want to study. You're really interested in it, and it helps a lot. Again, time management is key. It is intense, but as long as you manage your time, you should be absolutely fine. You do find that your style of learning will change. So what used to work for you at high school and college doesn't necessarily work for you at university. But I know from my own experience, again, that RVC are really supportive in terms of, you know, converting you into your different learning style. And there's a really good support network and advice centre if you're struggling with that. Just related to that, please, we advise not to buy books before you come to university. Veterinary books can be very expensive, and I'm talking a range from £60 to a couple £100. And personally, I'd rather spend that couple £100 doing something else. But and like I said, your learning style will change. So if you spend a couple £100 in a book, it's likely that it's going to change and it'll end up being a doorstop and you won't use it. If you're eager to buy books, we do sell them down through the years when people have finished with them at a cheaper price, and we also do discount sales every year. But yeah, everything changes, so it's going to change, but it's fun, and there's a lot of advice and support to help you through it.
Thank you very much. And excuse the delay. Once you've finished speaking, I've got to unmute myself and turn off the video, which is where the the few seconds go. Now, if I ask a couple of questions again, linked, related to perhaps students that have just maybe fell shy of entry requirements and your advice there. So again, if I can, I'll group two questions together if that's okay. Where are we? So if a student has fallen short in terms of entry requirements, would you, and I appreciate this is a very difficult question to perhaps ask, but would you recommend looking at maybe retaking a subject, or is there any alternatives that you see students perhaps do before applying? And then,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I think that might well be a linked question. And then linked to that, if students haven't got required grades, but perhaps say, for example, if AAA is a requirement, but students say get ABB, would that put them at a huge disadvantage? And do you have any advice for students there as well?
So yeah, both very good questions. The analogy, or one of two analogies I tend to give, is applying to veterinary school is a lot like running the 110-meter hurdles. If you imagine each one of those sort of entry requirements, which we have briefly gone through this afternoon, the first, and the order isn't necessarily important, but let's say the first is obviously submitting the application. Secondly, your achieved GCSE or equivalent grades. Then your level 3s, so your A levels or IB or BTEC level 3 extended diplomas, etc. The requirements. Then your work experience. Then the work experience form. All of these things are sort of obstacles in your way, so that when you get to either the penultimate hurdle, with that being, for example, sitting for interview, that we as a university have the best students for us at that point, because some students will unfortunately fall at one of those hurdles, by which I mean they might, to carry forward a little bit of what Sophie was saying, you know, we require biology, chemistry and a third subject at A level and IB higher level. If a student has done entirely humanities, as an example, then we would say at that hurdle, that student has fallen because they do not meet or and not very near any of our requirements which predict success on the course. There will, however, as I think the example you just gave, John, be sometimes whereby students are slightly away from our typical entry requirements. So it might be an AB at A level, or something similar. It might be one grade away at GCSE level, for example. Linking that to sort of resitting, to stand the best chance possible, you are clearing each one of the hurdles which we have on your journey to hopefully becoming a veterinary student. Rather than clipping, which you might well do. And obviously if you clip those hurdles, you're going to be a little bit slower than those students who are clearing those hurdles. I think if you're not meeting the requirements, then it's not in your hands, by which I mean you're hoping that those students who say have met, let's say, the GCSE and level 3 requirements are going to trip up elsewhere. So if a university looks at personal statements, then you're hoping that that student doesn't do as well as you, so that you can almost make up that ground on that particular applicant. And or with regards to us, for example, that work experience or supplementary work experience questionnaire, so that you can make up that that distance that you've fallen behind where you tripped. However, I'm also aware that in an ideal world, for example, you can resit, but based on your the school you're attending, other commitments like part-time work, for example, you might not be able to resit. So it's not to say that you would be automatically unsuccessful if you are close but not quite meeting our typical requirements. But obviously someone who has met our typical entry requirements will score higher in that section. So you're almost hoping that students will do poorly in other sections and you do well, so you can make up that ground and be in the front of the pack, because it's the front of the pack whom we invite through to interview, because they are the best that applying year. Similarly, and hopefully not to open a can of worms, you are competing against one another in that race. So if everyone is in a similar situation with regards to grading, for example, which varies typically every year, it might be down on the year before, then everyone's in the same boat. So consider who you're racing against, if you will, because you're all in the same boat. We're comparing you against one another whilst maintaining our standards to select students who are most likely to do well within our programme. With regards to other options, there is the option, and it links a bit to that fifth choice which you asked earlier. You can do I think I said zoology, animal sciences, biological sciences, to name but a few. You could study that for a 3 or 4 year duration period, with then the view to applying to graduate accelerated courses, which a number of veterinary schools do offer. However, the big thing I would say about that pathway is it is longer, and might well be the reason that there are myths of veterinary medicine taking 7 years, because you'll be doing your 3-year Bachelor of Science followed by a 4-year accelerated program. And there's also a big financial implication, not just in terms of your living expenses, in terms of studying for 7 years at university, but currently you will not receive a tuition fee loan. So at the moment, students on our graduate accelerated program from the UK will be self-funding £9,250 for each year of that 4-year course, because they've gained their student loan for their first degree, such as animal sciences, zoology, bioveterinary sciences, etc. So I guess trying to bring the two together, yes, include a fifth choice if you want to, but if you're thinking of that as an alternative route, do so in an informed manner, knowing that length and duration, and also a bigger investment in one's self. So if you are unsuccessful applying 1 year, it's worth probably checking the schools which allow resits and also reapplications. We accept resits as long as you get sort of the top grade, so an A in that resit that you are undertaking. And you can reapply to ourselves once more. So if one were to apply in a particular year and be unfortunately unsuccessful, you could hopefully do things, whether that be resitting grades, to get to the typical entry requirements or surpass them, and reapply that subsequent year, which would be 6 years in duration, because you'd have that year off where you improve yourself and reflect upon your performance, and then join the 5-year program. But it would be a heck of a lot of a difference in terms of total cost of study, but still a big investment in oneself, as university is.
Can I just add, but please don't be disheartened if for whatever reason you don't get the grades the first time and you still really want to do it. It's not uncommon to miss out the first time. I know multiple people who applied multiple times to different vet schools to get in. It is a long journey, and as Chris said, there are many hurdles to get over. So if you fall at one, don't put yourself down. Just get yourself back up and just keep going, because it is a long journey. And If you're worried about, being slightly older at vet school, don't be. We have people ranging from the normal age to come in, or 30, 40 years old. So don't think you're going to be slightly older. Don't be worried about that. Some people prefer to take a year out. It might be a blessing in disguise. A lot of people say a common question is, what should I do to prep for coming to vet school? And our biggest advice is nothing. Take the summer off, have fun with your friends, maybe do some work, get somebody behind you, things like that. But you don't need to do anything else. Just take a well-deserved break, because the road that ahead of you is very intense and you will appreciate having a break. So if you do, for whatever reason, do miss your grades, like I said, please don't be disheartened. It happens to a lot of people. Don't pull yourself down. A lot of people with the veterinary degree tell you that you can't do it, but if you want to do it, you could definitely do it. Just keep going with it. And yeah, like I said, it might be a blessing in disguise. A lot of people don't plan a gap year, but have the best gap year of their life. And actually, when they get to vet school, realize I actually needed that break from high school, from college, or whatever you were doing before starting university. Because as I said, it is very long and it is intense. So don't be too disheartened.
And just to go back to the number of veterinary schools, with there now being 10, so 2 relatively new members of the family, there are also, as you would suspect, more places available. So it is constantly growing. So there's over 1,000 places typically on offer every year, which if you compare, to 5-10 years ago, it would be quite substantially less. Now I start to show my age when I say those sort of figures, but I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sophie. It's lovely to have a student feedback to the questions as well, Sophie. So a big thank you there. I'll ask 2 linked questions again, conscious of time, but also conscious that pretty much all the people that started the session are still here now. So you are obviously finding this very useful. And you never know, in terms of inquiries that RVC get, you could perhaps just play the video rather than answer in the future. Might help you there. So 2 questions now linked to the applicant supplementary form. Hopefully I've not shown my lack of knowledge about the subject area with that pronunciation. So is there a word limit, Chris, when writing about work experience? And then a linked question to that. Are you allowed to include work experience attained prior to the 18 months, even though it won't be included in the 140-hour total requirement?
Yeah, so typically there is a word limit with regards to supplementary questionnaire. We do slightly change it every year, so we're still in the process of making sure that we're asking the correct questions in order to, as I say, predict success on the course. If there is ever a word limit, it will be abundantly clear. So we said last year, for example, this is the word limit. If you go above it, you'll be you won't score as well, essentially, as someone who has remained under or stuck to that word limit. The word limit is, I guess, a bit of a clue as well. If we're saying a couple of 100 words as an example, and you write 1 word, you might want to just think, actually, I probably want to expand my answer a little bit. And I know that sounds really obvious, but we ask for everything that we want from you in that supplementary questionnaire. An important skill of being a veterinarian is, and a veterinary student for that matter, is following instruction. So if we say, please stick to this word limit, and you don't stick to that word limit, then obviously you're not demonstrating that particular trait. I think the other thing, particularly with regards to the work experience supplementary form, is to read the question and answer the question rather than the question you want to answer. We do get quite a lot of students who have great answers, but they're not to questions which we're asking of them. So take your time. Typically the form launches in early September to go alongside the launching of the UCAS portal to apply. I would say take your time, look over those hours and other veterinary schools questionnaires, and copy the questions down, put it in a Word document, something like that, so that you can sculpt your answers much in the same way as you no doubt will have done within your personal statement. Make sure you're clear on what the question is so that you answer the question and not some rambling about how good you are about a particular thing, because whilst that's interesting, we can only score you on what we're asking you about. With regards to the question about 18 months, so submitting work experience completed prior to the year and a half leading up to an application, which is currently our requirement. If you have space, so last year there were a number of placements that you could put in. If you still have space, there's nothing to stop you putting in work experience which you accrued before the year and a half leading up to an application. I'll just re-emphasize making sure you check all of the veterinary schools that you're considering closer to the UCAS portal being open, because I suspect that some schools might tweak entry requirements. So, for example, I'm not saying this is the case. I repeat, I'm not saying this is the case, but universities might well say, well, recent is now categorized as this, so some work experience which you undertook might now class as counting within that period, because we are in such unprecedented times. But as I say, check with the respective universities to make sure that you're aware of any tweaks like that if they do arise.
Thank you very much, Chris. Again, conscious of time, especially, and I know Sophie's got a very busy schedule, because I looked at the schedule earlier on in the session. So we will certainly finish by past, we say, and I'll get through as many questions as I can beforehand. To try and whiz through the questions and get really good answers for as many people as possible, I'll group now 3 questions, and then Chris, if you, and Sophie, if appropriate, if you can kind of contribute with the main advice based on the 3 questions that you can. So one question looks at work experience requirements, and a lot of the work experience is in human medicine rather than veterinary medicine. Would it be okay to talk about the human experiences in the application, as many of the skills are transferable? Then a separate question, if I can move on, which looks at the extended project qualification, the EPQ, and would you recommend doing that in relation to applications? And then the final one is looking at online virtual work experience opportunities to replace perhaps placements, and what your thoughts of those are, please.
Okay, so with regards to experience within a human setting, yes, it can be beneficial, particularly with regards to personal statements, but I would say it probably falls within that maximum additional 20%, whereby you're talking about the transferable skills, which I believe the question sort of alluded to there. Whilst there might be a lot of commonality between veterinary medicine and human medicine, we would want experience within a veterinary setting, because obviously your patients cannot speak with you, which is quite different to human medicine, at least in most cases. So yes, it could be beneficial in demonstrating an environment whereby you've developed your communication or empathy skills, for example, but I wouldn't suspect it would count towards animal-related experience, either clinical or animal handling experience. But I would go a little bit further and just say, you can, with regards to that remaining 20%, with regards to personal statements for those schools who do use them, you know, any experience that you have is relevant as long as you show a university why it is relevant. So, as I said, whether that be working in a supermarket, whether that be volunteering for a local charity, you're not going to get invited to interview because of that particular activity, but a university, if they can see that you are aware that this is a valuable trait or skill and that you've developed it through that position of responsibility, then you're going to stand more of a chance of being selected and invited through to interview. So always make sure there's a point to something which you are including. What you are essentially, the approach that I always suggest that you try and take is try not to make any admissions officers such as myself think, because if I'm having to think, then you're not showing me that you have what it takes to be a successful veterinary student. So if you say, I've worked at a farm or I've worked in a human hospital, then and leave it there, then I'm having to think and go, well, how is that relevant? What skills has this person developed? And as soon as I'm doing that in my head, I'm almost rewriting what you've put in that personal statement and or in that supplementary work experience form. So I can't score you on what my head rewrites. But if you show me or any other admissions officer that this is what you did, this is the insight that you gained and or skills that you've developed, it becomes, I'm not saying it is as easy as a checkbox, but you're showing us that you have the skills, traits, attributes, insight to be successful applicant, hopefully, and subsequently may well be invited through to interview. With regards to EPQ, they can be extremely beneficial, but there's no golden ticket in veterinary medicine. So if we see the words EPQ or hear the words EPQ at interview, whatever it might well be, we're not going to go, oh, here's the fast track line, because similarly, we get a lot of questions typically about, well, if I go into an avatar, will I get invited through to interview? It's not so much what you do that's going to get you through the application process and interview process. It's what you learn from those particular activities that you get involved with, how you reflect upon those and how you develop yourself. So if you do an EPQ to get a qualification and you're not really that interested, then through the application process, including interview, you'll be flat if you're talking about it. You might be going, well, I did this and I did that and it was okay, and I, so on and so forth. However, if you're extremely passionate about it, you're going to be animated. You're going to say, oh yeah, I was able to learn this and I went on to study that. And there's just that different enthusiasm level. And even when writing something such as the questionnaire, if you're passionate about something, it will sort of leap off the page at us, hopefully a little bit like that personal statement example did. One was quite pedestrian and there wasn't necessarily a rhythm. The second one had a bit more fluidity, and that passion resonated through as a result. So yes, EPQs can be beneficial if you are passionate about what you're doing. And linked to what Sophie was saying earlier about having a break before veterinary school, don't do it if you don't think you can manage getting work experience as well as achieving the high grades and having a social life, because we don't want anyone to burn out before they get to veterinary school. So yes, an EPQ can be beneficial, but as I say, it's not an entry requirement. So if you cannot do it because your school doesn't offer it or for whatever reason, don't worry too much. You can do a bit of independent research yourself by going on the internet and searching about bovine TB if that's something that really fascinates you. You don't have to have a formalized qualification. And similarly at interview, then if something comes up about bovine TB, whether it be independent research that you've done or an EPQ, then you're in the same boat. We're not going to, as long as you can convey and apply it a little bit as Sophie did within the question slightly earlier, you're going to have a greater arsenal of information to recall and apply to situations, which is obviously going to impress us, again, if that topic were to come up. With regards to online opportunities, there are quite a lot out there. So I'm sure if you use any search engine, you'll be able to find opportunities. We mentioned a few podcasts, the Vet Times and the RBC clinical podcasts. We have about, I think it's up to, well, it's over 100 podcasts there. So things like that can definitely be beneficial. But again, similarly to the EPQ, it depends upon how you use it. If you just listen to it, you might, as I say, in the presentation, recall about 5% of it. But if you maybe write some notes, try and do some further learning as a result of it, then it's going to stay in your memory, hopefully, so that you can recount it through the application process if relevant and you're passionate about it, and or you could perhaps recall it at interview again if it's relevant to a question or questions which are asked. I think it's Edinburgh as well have a MOOC, so basically an online free program about, I think I'll get the title slightly wrong, purely by accident, it's not intentional, about what it takes to be a veterinary student, or words to that effect. So yeah, there are lots out there, some free, some do have a cost attributed to it.
Sorry, can I just add on to what Chris just said with regards to the EMQ, and also linked to that, your third subject, if you are doing A-levels, It is kind of repeating what Chris said, but those hurdles, if you're considering EMQ, just make sure that you're jumping over those hurdles. Those hurdles are the thing that are going to get you to vet school. If you're confident that you can clear those hurdles, you know, in terms of personal statement, application, work experience, and the biggest one is achieving your grades, then EMQs are great as an additional thing. But from personal experience, I considered an EMQ, and I thought about it for a good couple of weeks, but I decided to really focus on my studies, because I thought if I do an EMQ but I get a B at a certain subject, it doesn't matter if I did the EMQ, I'm still not going to get into veterinary school because I needed that A. And linking to that, I also just want to mention your third subject. A common question we get is, will it benefit me if I do physics or maths as my third subject? And again, I'm speaking on behalf of the RVC, not of universities, but we don't have a preference in terms of that third subject. So if you want to do sociology, history, something like that, something a little bit different, and that's absolutely fine. Again, if you love physics, you love maths, that's great, and if you're confident you're going to get a good grade in it, then do it, but just make sure you're doing something that's going to clear that hurdle and you're going to get an A in. For me personally, I did sociology. It was something that came very naturally to me. I really enjoyed, and I found it a little bit easier in comparison to my other subjects. So it was one of those lessons I could go into, I could really enjoy. I was quite confident I was going to get a good grade in it. And it also kept my essay-based skills up, whereas in biology and chemistry, we didn't do very long essays. But when you come to vet school, you will have to do research projects and essays and things like that. So it kept those skills there for me as well. So just make sure you're clearing those hurdles, and any additional is great, but just make sure you're focusing on them. Yeah, so just make sure you focus on the grades.
Thank you very much, Sophie, and thank you to Chris as well. It's now 4:30, but we have had one question that's come up from two different students. So with your permission, we will take this final question. I should add, if I've not answered your question, I'm sorry. If you email me after the session, jon@unitasterdays.com, I'll do my best to get an answer for you if you've not managed to get an answer for you. But this one, perhaps it might be a result of recent television programs. Maybe you get more inquiries like this. But for students who are interested in working perhaps with exotic or wild animals, have you got any tips at all if anyone was interested in specializing in that area, or having experience with those? I'd imagine this is going to come up more and more progressively over time, perhaps.
Yeah, it's definitely currently a popular area of veterinary medicine with regards to the interest which students have. As a result of that, and being on an island which is not necessarily as exotic as some of the other countries or continents around us, what you'll find is typically most veterinary schools offer a program that primarily focuses on the companion animals, so the cats, dogs, which you would expect, as well as horses and the typical production animals, as we mentioned in the presentation. With regards to exotics, if you do have that interest, I would say, as we mentioned within the presentation, go in with an open mind, because you won't in the UK be able to qualify as solely an exotic animal vet. You will need to graduate as a veterinarian, which you'll do through a 5-year undergraduate program at one of the 10 universities currently in the UK. And it will be linked to that pre-registration differentiation we mentioned. So it will be about asking all of the schools, what is my opportunity to engage with exotic animals? And if you have a particular area, it's worth going further and stipulating that, by which, and Sophie might correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, rabbits are categorized as exotic animals. So if you leave it as broad as exotics, a school might answer your question accidentally, well, both accurately, but you might misinterpret it because we haven't clarified the definition. I would assume that with most students asking about exotics, they're not necessarily thinking about rabbits. They might be watching the television programs where, you know, they're out to Botswana or South Africa or somewhere such as that. It isn't going to form the main part of any UK degree, because it's not, the majority of graduates are not going to go into that particular discipline. However, there are typically opportunities. So we do have opportunities through that bias that you can add towards the degree program through working with exotic animals. There are also typically societies, so I can think of the Zoological Society that we have at the RBC that offer trips, as well as they've done sort of symposiums, so sort of mini conferences, as well as bringing guest lecturers as well. I guess also linking somewhat to the animal handling requirements in years 1 and 2 of the programme, and the extramural placements, so the placements outside of the university. Typically there is an opportunity of some free choice within those work experience placements. So if you had an interest, you could sort of seek out placements that fulfill that desire which you have for exotic animal medicine. We also have a wild animal health master's program for qualified veterinarians. It's run jointly with ZSL London Zoo to give, again, further training on that, as well as doing an internship and residency in exotic animal medicine. So those latter 2 steps would be the way to become a specialist in exotic veterinary medicine.
Thank you very much, Chris. Excellent, and thank you to Sophie too for excellent Q&A answers and answering so many. I usually run these events, and I'm always quite reluctant to ask live questions to presenters when it's just one question, because they're not going to know what to expect. Whereas Chris and Sophie have answered absolutely loads. So a big thank you for that. I'm sure this video, as far as a live audience, will be incredibly useful, but also as the recording, I'm sure it'll be really, really useful as well. So a big thanks to Chris, a big thanks to Sophie, judging how busy your schedule is. Sophie, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll leave it there. Hope you have found this session useful. Just a reminder, we do run these events every single Tuesday on different subjects at 9:30 and free, and then general university guidance at 12. See you all soon. Do take care. Thank you.